Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? Hi, I'm Nathan Mercero, CEO of Planning Alternatives. We're a disruptive brand in the financial planning space with a point of view that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Growing up in a small town in Canada, I experienced examples of families with money and without. It started me on this journey of understanding wealth and the idea that spending a day in a canoe with someone could be one of the best investments you could make. Join me as I sit down with leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, rule breakers, and friends to discover their perspective of true wealth. And maybe you'll start to shift yours. I'm delighted today to be joined by Steve Divitkos, who's the founder of Mineola Search Partners, a company that invests in search funds, the entrepreneurs who run them, and the companies they acquire. Previously, Steve served as the CEO of Microdia, a document management and workflow automation software company, acquiring the business in 2014, sold the business to a strategic acquirer later, and served as a CEO for 7 years. Steve's seen a lot of issues with businesses and the challenges and opportunities within them. So Steve, welcome to Day in a Canoe. Maybe you could help us and just unpack what search funds mean and how do they operate?
Sure. So at some point, the concept of a search fund was new to me. Just to give you some context, I began my career in private equity, did that for a couple of years, and I had pretty entrepreneurial ambitions at the time, but they were pretty fuzzy. I didn't know exactly what form they might take. In spite of my entrepreneurial ambitions, I had never really considered myself a 0 to 1 venture funded startup type person. So I was looking for different ways to pursue an entrepreneurial career and an entrepreneurial life. And my first year of business school, 2010, was kind of the light bulb moment that I was looking for. So I learned about this structure where a young entrepreneur, typically in their 20s or 30s, raises a small pool of capital from a group of investors. And that pool of capital sustains a search for 2 years to buy a single company, not just to own, but also to operate as its CEO. So search funds have been around since the early 80s. Over the past 5 to 10 years, entrepreneurship through acquisition is maybe a slightly more descriptive title. So the way that I thought about it at the time was to kind of satisfy the entrepreneurial ambitions that I had. Option number one is, found a company in a 0 to 1 type startup. Option number two is effectively buy my way into the entrepreneurial career that I had been seeking for myself. So I spent about 2 years searching for a company. In probably mid 2013, I stumbled upon a 20-year-old software company founded by a father-son combination. The father was in his 70s at the time. The son was probably in his mid to late 40s. The company was too large for like a single individual to buy, but it was too small for traditional exit opportunities, private equity, most notably. And the company was looking for a succession plan, but they were of such a size that a obvious succession plan never quite presented itself. And the way that I kind of characterized myself to the founders at the time was I'm effectively a succession plan looking for the right small business to succeed. So from their perspective, they were able to sell the business. They were able to transition out and pursue other areas of interest. And for me, I was able to live the entrepreneurial career that I had been searching for without founding a business of my own. So that's kind of how I found myself as the CEO of a software company as a 27-year-old.
It's a fascinating story. Now, when people get ready to look for a company to buy or to raise funds, how does that happen structurally? So is it a family at a Thanksgiving dinner saying, "Hey, you're really smart, Steve. Let's go, help you buy a company," and it's friends and family that are doing fundraising? Just break down the steps that usually need to take place for this to be successful.
I mean, there's a wide range of ways to do it. I mean, to put it in its most simple context, I mean, as long as you have enough money to buy the company, you're limited only by your creativity, your imagination, and what a reasonable third party would be willing to invest in. So yes, there are kind of the proverbial friends and family type structures. Generally speaking, those types of structures acquire much, much, much smaller businesses. Search funds, you can think of as a bit more of like a professionalized asset class in a way, where there are now a rather large group of professional search fund investors, of which now I am one, who do nothing all day but support young entrepreneurs looking for a single company to own and operate into the indefinite future. So in my case, I was plugged into the network through my time at business school and was able to connect with probably 15 or 20 individuals and institutions that invest in search and in small business as their profession. And fortunately, they were willing to back me at the time. And not only did they write the check to sustain a 2-year search for the company to buy, but in return for funding that 2-year search, they got the first right of refusal to invest in the company that I ultimately presented to them. So the funders of my 2-year search ultimately became part of the equity of the acquired company. And at least in my case, the entire journey was about 9 years. So about 2 years searching for and acquiring the company, and then 7 years as the CEO prior to exit.
Now, the whole topic of succession is a critical one for businesses that have been established many times by a single founder, and they built the business, and now it's time to look to either monetize it or pass it on to the next generation. Can you just describe the landscape that we're in right now around like how many small businesses need succession? Is it a small amount, high amount? What are you seeing from a trend standpoint? I've been speaking to a friend recently, and he said there's just a massive gap with business owners and succession. And
Yeah.
curious what your point of view is.
So what's particularly interesting is that the thesis that compelled me to do this 15 years ago remains just as true today as it was then, which I think is quite interesting. Owing to the demographic trends, notably the baby boomer generation, the word silver tsunami has been thrown around a while, but basically it's referring to like the largest transfer of wealth in recorded economic history. So business owners aged, let's say 55 to 70 on average, running businesses that are, again, too large to be purchased by a single individual, but too small to be purchased by private equity as an asset class. These businesses kind of need to go somewhere. And the stats are actually rather dreary in terms of succession. So depending on kind of what you believe and where you get your information from, fewer than 10% of small businesses have formalized succession plans. Often the most logical choice is to pass it to a child. Sometimes the child is in the business, but maybe isn't capable, quite frankly, of running the business. Sometimes they're simply not interested and they want to carve their own path. And so, unfortunately, particularly for these small businesses, let's call it 5 to 30 million in revenue, 1 to 5 million in cash flow, somewhere in that general ballpark, the most common succession option is no succession at all, which is the company simply winds down. And that's a deeply unfortunate outcome, given that small businesses across North America employ 90% of the workforce. So, as best as possible, little solutions like search funds have emerged to kind of plug that hole and solve that problem. And in my case, again, this was, roughly 15 years ago, but that's exactly what happened. The company was of a size that their succession options were limited. The founders had been running it for 20 years, so God bless them, they were tired, understandably so. And they cared a lot about what happened to their company. They were not just looking for a check. They were not looking to kind of go to a beach the day after closing. They deeply cared about what happened to their company. And what resonated for them was the fact that I was a single entrepreneur and they were looking into the whites of the eyes of the person that was going to be running their company. They liked the fact that there was no portfolio. I was a portfolio of one asset. They liked that I'd be dedicating all of my time and attention to the company. And they valued things like, I was planning to keep the company name. I was planning to retain the company's employees. I was very growth oriented. I was planning to continue sponsorships of local charities that were important to them. These, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of softer considerations, understandably, were deeply important to them. And turns out that there was like seller buyer fit in that regard.
Our team at Planning Alternatives here, we just came off of a two and a half day offsite retreat for everyone, talking about, hey, what's our values? What do we focus on? What are things and what are areas of giftedness that each person on the team has? And then how can we apply it into our business environment and how we're helping our clients? When you see a situation where there's a broken culture, I mean, it's one thing to see financials and projections, but then you step into a situation where culture is the issue. What's your playbook on how to address either a culture that's broken or something that really needs to be addressed immediately?
I mean, culture was one of those things that I used to roll my eyes at when I was in business school, and I used to like snicker at people who told me that kind of stuff mattered. And after having been a CEO for 7 years, I can tell you in no uncertain terms that culture was probably the most important thing that we spent time on. I think think probably my experience taught me that like there is no such thing as a panacea or a silver bullet for fixing or improving or even changing a culture. It took us the entirety of our 7-year hold period to kind of get the culture to where we wanted it to be. And there were still lots of areas for improvement. Ping pong tables and beanbag chairs do not equate to culture. Any fool can put those in the meeting room. Culture is about, basically what people do in your absence is kind of one way that I've thought about it. It's about mission, it's about vision, it's about values, it's about why you do what you do. It's about people understanding why what they're doing is contributing to the company's ultimate why. So we spent an enormous amount of time and attention and money, frankly, on building culture. As an acquirer of a business, the other thing that I learned and have learned many, many times now as an investor in these types of small business transactions is like, unfortunately, you can kind of only know so much about the culture from the outside looking in. You really, and I wish that there was a silver bullet for this, it really takes you getting inside the guts of the business to truly understand what it's about. I often say that I learned more in my first 2 weeks as a CEO than I did in the 6 months of due diligence that preceded my purchase. Like once you're inside the four walls of the company, you the types of things that you learn about and the overall spirit of the things that you learn about are just so different from what you learn about from the outside looking in. And understandably, business owners are hesitant to connect you with their leadership team, with employees. They have confidentiality concerns. They're concerned that, hey, if the deal falls apart on the 99-yard line, what happens there? So, as an acquirer, there are things that you can do to kind of educate yourself on culture. But in my experience, the unfortunate reality is 90% of what there is to learn, you will probably learn once you're inside the guts of the business.
Now, you've experienced a successful exit after growing a business. What drove the value of your exit?
There was a lot. One thing would be focus. So when we bought the company, we sold our software across 5 different industry verticals. By the time we sold the company, we sold our software only to a single industry vertical, being transportation and logistics. I think trying to do too much and being too many things to too many people is one of the most common flaws that I see in small businesses. Ultimately, in my experience, in most circumstances, the returns to focus exceed the returns to diversification. So focusing our business, our product, our sales, our marketing, our hiring, everything around a single industry, I think was very helpful. Eventually, we changed our revenue model to be more recurring in nature. Out at the outset, it was a large upfront purchase of software. So basically, you pay us $100 today, you can use the software forever and ever. We change it to more of a, hey, pay us, I'm just making up numbers, $10 or $20 a month, and you'll renew that every year. So I think that was quite a large change that we implemented. I'd say just kind of like professionalizing it and making it less founder centric. The original founders of the company were deeply talented people, but when we bought the company, the management team was maybe 2 people. Arguably, when we sold the company, the management team was 7 people. So the CEO in the latter case, me, was just less important to the day-to-day operations. We also built internal disciplines that didn't exist. Like we had no finance and accounting department at entry. At exit, we had a team of 4. We had no customer success department. We had no QA department. So just building internal capabilities that didn't used to exist, and then investing a lot in technology. From our CRM software used by the sales team to the ticketing system used by the support team to how we did QA in our development organization, a lot of technology investments had to happen. And I would say that our ultimate acquirers, looked at that and said, hey, that's a bunch of corporate hygiene that we're not going to have to spend time and money on. So I think, off the top of my head, those are some of the things that come to mind.
Now, you've had a successful journey as an entrepreneur. When did you get that itch, and what are some lessons that you've learned along the way that you can pass on to listeners to say, hey, here's my story, but here's what you might want to take notice of personally?
I think I've always had the itch at some level, but coming out of undergrad, I took a very traditional career path. For me, I think the moment came, it was classic private equity. I was, 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. Of course, I'm working on 2 deals simultaneously. And I was looking to the proverbial guy to my left. And I could just tell that he had found his calling. I mean, he used to read equity research reports for fun. He used to study the credit markets for fun. And God bless him. Yeah, that's a very rare thing for anyone in any profession to find. And it was just very clear to me that like my current profession at the time was not that for me, right? So I need to go find my thing. And in business school, my eyes were open to this world of entrepreneurship through acquisition. And I'm very fortunate that I do believe quite strongly that I have kind of found my thing in the way that my colleague found his 15 years ago. So I have not had a quote unquote regular job since I was, I don't know, in my early 20s. I mean, in terms of like lessons learned, I could probably talk to you for the next like 6 months about lessons learned as an entrepreneur. I mean, some things that immediately come to mind is don't go it alone. Entrepreneurship is a notoriously lonely journey. But what I came to learn is, you need not go it alone. So a combination of things that I did and wish that I did. I think every entrepreneur probably needs at least a therapist, a business coach, a peer group like EO or YPO, and like an investor slash mentor who's not on your board, who you feel comfortable being vulnerable with. Like that would be like 4 pillars of support. I would say as an entrepreneur and CEO, you probably need at least 3 of those. So that would be kind of number 1. Number 2 is I invest in a lot of young prospective CEOs coming out of business school. Not a lot of people kind of use these exact words, but it's clear that some of them think that like entrepreneurship is the greener grass. It's like the easier option. And I often say that like I cannot think of a harder way to make money than being an entrepreneur. I think it was Elon Musk who said like being an entrepreneur is like eating glass every day. I mean, in some ways that's kind of true. Being an entrepreneur and being a CEO was the most brutally difficult thing I've ever done, and I would never have it any other way. So to me, what's important is your why. Why are you doing this? What's your North Star? What gets you out of bed in the morning after a really hard day the day before? It's okay if money is part of it, but it can't be all of it. Because what I came to learn is like, boy, there are easier ways to make money than this, at least in my experience running a small business. So I think your reason why needs to be honest and clear-eyed and bigger than yourself. I think societally, a lot of people focus on like the kind of glamorous parts of entrepreneurship. Title, pay, independence, freedom, autonomy. Yeah, that's all wonderful stuff. That's great. But I often say that everything has a price. And as an entrepreneur, yes, you get those benefits, but boy, do you pay a price for them, right? Me and my wife often joke, shit rolls uphill, which is to say, like, as a small business CEO, seemingly all day, every day, all you do is deal with problems. And it's up to you to make the decisions. And if you make a bad decision, maybe that leads to a layoff. Maybe that leads to an employee who can't make their mortgage payment next month. And that's a heavy weight. And people who have never sat in the seat just cannot appreciate what it feels like to put your head on the pillow at night with that weight on you. So I think the world needs more entrepreneurs. As a Canadian, I say this all the time. I think Canada needs more entrepreneurs and a much more robust entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I celebrate and applaud entrepreneurship in all of its forms. And I wish that the smart people currently going into hedge funds and private equity would hang up a shingle and try something on their own. But I also think that it's important to be clear-eyed about it and that this is not the easier path. This is a deeply difficult one. So you have to be kind of in it for the right reasons.
Steve, you've accumulated a lot of wisdom along the way, and it's inspiring just to hear you recap this in a succinct manner so that people can get some takeaways. I know, and it sounds like you found your true wealth, which is your why, and then you focus on taking steps every day, even through the obstacles, the challenges that life brings, to focus on your why, and that builds both an economic and a satisfaction index that is immeasurable at the end of the day. So I want to thank you for your time stopping by Dana Canoe and wish you all the best.
Thank you, Nathan. Good to be here.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. To discover what wealth means to you, please take our assessment at planningalt.com.